I read 23 books in 2023, so let's talk about them. I'm just gonna go chronologically from the start of 2023 to the end and talk about my favorites, my least favorites, give you my ratings. I just wanted to talk about some books. The first book I read in 2023 was The Couple Next Door. I feel like it's a good book for anyone who's trying to get back into reading. It's basically about this couple who goes to their neighbor's house for dinner and they leave their newborn or infant young baby at their house because she's sleeping, and they come back and she's missing. So it's just like a whodunit book trying to figure out where the baby is, what happened to her, who took her. Honestly, I would recommend it. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Some of these books I don't have with me because they're at my apartment or I borrow them from a friend. But the next book that I read was Layla by Colleen Hoover. I know a lot of people have strong feelings about Colleen Hoover. The big thing about Layla is that obviously there is romance in it. There are also ghosts in this book. For me, it was my first book that I read that had ghosts and anything paranormal, and I wasn't sure if I would like that. But I ended up liking it. I thought it was done in an easy to read and semi-believable way, so I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. Continuing on the Colleen Hoover trend, the next book that I read was It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover, and this book was actually a second book to the original, which was It Ends With Us. I felt like you could kind of tell that the author wrote it just because fans wanted it, not because it continued on the storyline, but it was still a good read regardless, and I gave it a 7 out of 10. The next book I read in 2023 was Things We Never Got Over, and I will never get over how much I hated this book. This book follows this girl who just ran away from her wedding, and she goes to a new city to try to meet with her sort of troubled and problematic sister. It's a grumpy sunshine story. It's kind of like that trope with the big burly guy saves the damsel in distress. And in reading this book, I realized that that is my least favorite trope in the world. Now, if you like that trope, then you might absolutely love this book. Besides that, I also really didn't like the writing style. And this book is a pretty thick book. I really don't like starting a book and not finishing a book. So I forced myself to get through this, but it was so difficult. Just not for me. I gave this book a 4 out of 10. This next one is A Narrow Door by Joanne Harris. This one I don't think I've actually heard anyone talk about, but the main character has a lot of trauma from when her older brother passed away when she was only 4 years old. The part of the story is her going back to the school that her brother went to at the time when he died and trying to remember what happened because of her trauma, she's repressed all the memories. I personally didn't love the ending, but I do think as a whole, I enjoyed reading the book, so I think I gave this a 7 out of 10. Where Are the Children by Mary Higgins Clark. This one, nobody told me how dark this was. This was all over TikTok, and I started reading it and I was like chills. So this story is about a mother who both of her children died a very, very tragic death. And then several years later, she's remarried to somebody else. She has children with this new guy, and all of a sudden, her children go missing again in the same way, under the same circumstances that they went missing the first time. It was definitely a big page turner. I was definitely very invested on what was happening, so 8 out of 10. Next book I read was Then She Was Gone. I think this was also over the summertime. Then She Was Gone follows this woman whose daughter went missing 10 years ago, kind of similar premises to the last book. Now, several years later, this woman meets a new man and she starts a relationship with him, except she notices that the man's daughter looks exactly like her missing daughter. How is that even happening? How do they look so similar? What actually happened to her daughter? I gave this a 7 out of 10. Next book is Daisy Jones and the Six. I read this book because I really wanted to read more from this author, Taylor Jenkins Reid, because I had read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I think the year before. I got this one, and I really love this one too. It mainly follows the band, which is called The Six, and this independent singer, Daisy Jones, and it talks about the story of the band being created, Daisy Jones starting her stardom, and then how Daisy Jones and The Six ultimately come together and form their own sound. But it was more so just interesting reading about a rock band at this time, kind of the culture and the lifestyle that they had. I definitely recommend this. This was an 8.5 out of 10. Then we're getting to my favorite book that I read in 2023. Oh my gosh, this is Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This book follows the main character Macy, and it goes back and forth between the past and the present. In the present, Macy is dealing with some things and she meets some guy from her past, Elliot, who she had a romance with when she was younger, and then it goes back into the past and it talks about their friendship and how that formed when they were like teenagers. You slowly start to figure out what happened and why they're no longer together, and I loved their friendship turning into romance. It reminded me a lot of me and my boyfriend, so I think that's part of the reason why I loved it so much. They're so young when they first meet, and they kind of are learning about the world and learning about each other and learning about love all at the same time. I don't rate books 10 out of 10 just like that, but this is a 10 out of 10, if not an 11 out of 10. Please read it. Next one is The Murder Game. This one takes place in a boarding school, and there's a murder that happened. The main guy is trying to figure out what happened, who did it. He was kidnapped when he was younger and he was able to escape that. So because of that experience, he has kind of like expert knowledge in figuring out what happened here. I thought it was an okay story. I did find it a little bit predictable, but I do think it was a fun thriller. So I gave this a 7 out of 10. Then I read Before I Let Go. This follows a divorced woman who is co-parenting with her ex-husband. It follows the present where both the wife and the ex-husband are still dealing with the same stuff that they dealt with that eventually led to their divorce. It discusses how the relationship changes from there, if they ultimately decide to fix or let go of their relationship. I think since it was kind of similar to Love in Other Words and I had just read that, I don't know if any other romance could really compare to that at the time. I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. Okay, we're finally on to my second stack. Well, this brings me next into the trilogy For One of Us Is Lying. I read all 3 of these books back to back. It's a little bit Breakfast Clubby because all these kids are in high school and they are put in detention, and one of the kids in detention dies. All the kids that were in the room at the time of his death are considered as suspects, and that's the premise of the first book. And then the 2 books that follow it are kind of stemming from that. Those main people are central in trying to figure out what happened. I personally liked the second book in the series a little bit better. I gave this an 8 out of 10 and those 2 a 7.5, but I felt like the storyline in this one was a little bit more interesting for me. Next book I read was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. The Paris Apartment is about this girl who goes to her brother's apartment in London, except that he's not there and he's missing and nobody knows where he is. So she's staying at his apartment trying to figure out if anyone in the apartment knows what happened to him, and everyone's looking a little sus. I found the book okay, honestly, but I felt like it was just not very believable, so I gave it like a 6.5 out of 10. Next, I read The Dead Romantics, and this was a fun read because I read it in October. As the name suggests, The Dead Romantics is about romance, and it also includes ghosts, and it also includes a lot of family love and dynamics, which I really liked. I did find it pretty believable, and I really enjoyed it. So that book I gave an 8 out of 10. Next, I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This book got me into Emily Henry. I bought like 3 more books from her, which I'm so excited to read. But Book Lovers was just a sweet romance, and it starts off a little bit like enemies to lovers, but it quickly becomes friends to lovers. I felt like I was invested in the characters' lives besides just the romance, which I really love when that happens in books. So I gave that a 9 out of 10. Next we have my second 10 out of 10 read in 2023. This is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Again, like, I feel like there's not much I can tell you about this book other than just read it. This book is just about family, and it's about siblings, and it's about parents, and I just loved the sibling dynamic in here. There's a lot of hard things that the kids in this book had to deal with. I loved it. Okay, we're finally on to the last 5 books of 2023. The next one I read was One Italian Summer, which, thinking back on it, would have been really great to read in the summer, but I actually read it in December. This one also is not a romance book. If anything, it's about a love between a mother and her daughter. It's about this woman whose mother recently passed away, but before she passed away, she and her daughter had planned to go on a trip to Italy because the mother had spent a lot of her time in her 20s in Italy and she wanted to show her daughter all of that. The daughter decides that she's gonna go on the trip by herself. When she goes on this trip, she sees her mother when she was her age. but she's kind of creating that connection with her mom through this new woman. I thought it was a really beautiful story. It really made me want to go visit Italy with my mom, and I give it an 8.5 out of 10. This one was another Christina Lauren book because I loved Love in Other Words. It's like a cute little rom-com. The main girl is on this cabin trip with her family that she goes on every single year with her family and a few of their family friends, except that when they're leaving the trip, something happens and she dies, but then she keeps reliving the cabin trip several times, and each time she keeps dying. And it is a romance, so as things progress in that relationship, she starts living a little bit longer in the days, if that makes any sense. So this was a 7 out of 10. Next one we have is The House Across the Lake. It did have me invested. I did want to know what happened next. But as it kept going, I was like, okay, this is really crazy. I don't know if I can continue. Like, at the end, I was just like, eh. For me, it was a 6 out of 10. This one is The Song of Achilles, which I had actually read the year before already, so I was rereading it. But I really wanted to reread it because I had read it the first time, and you know when you get that feeling where you're like, I just feel like I didn't fully grasp the book for everything that it was? That's kind of how I felt with this. I was like, I need to read it again. This is a Greek mythology romance, and it is so beautiful. I think the first time I read this book, I gave it a 7 out of 10, but I think now I would give it 9.5, maybe 10. But let's say 9.5. Maybe the third time I read it, it'll be a 10. If you don't like crying books, then don't read this. But if you like to cry when you read, this is the book that will do it for you. So this 9.5, maybe 10. This is the last book I read in 2023. I literally read this on December 31st, 2023. I just wanted to make sure I got my 23 books in. It was a very short book with a lot of pictures, so I feel like it was kind of cheating, but it was a book. But I thought it was a really sweet read, and it really made me appreciate learning and my education. So that wraps up all 23 books I read in 2023. I am trying to read 30 books for 2024. We'll see if that happens. I think hopefully I can do it. So far I'm on my second book of the year, but I need to add some books to that list. So if you guys have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments, and thanks for watching. Bye!